Buenas tardes. Para la presentación de esta tarde contaremos con los servicios de interpretación al español en simultáneo. Si usted desea escuchar esta presentación en español, en unos momentos usted podrá observar en la barra de herramientas en la parte inferior de su pantalla el icono de un globo terráqueo. Al seleccionar este icono, usted tendrá una lista de los idiomas en los que puede participar. Seleccione español para escuchar la interpretación. I am ready to be as the interpreter.
Thank you very much, Pamela. My name is Albert Garcia. I'm a librarian with the Contra Costa County Library, and I'm very happy to be here today partnering with the League of Women Voters. Before I hand it over, I do want to say a few things about the library. If you haven't been into the library or visited our website lately, I highly recommend you get in there. We have a lot of great things going on in the library and on our website. The Contra Costa County Library is happy to connect you with our resources, services, and materials at all 26 of our branches. Access more than 1 million physical items, including international language collections, and thousands of digital materials 24/7 at ccclib.org. Visit any library to use our public computers, printers, and free Wi-Fi. You can also visit one of our branches with laptops for on-site use or check out a Wi-Fi hotspot for 3 weeks. Contra Costa County Library's adult literacy program trains and supports volunteer tutors to deliver basic literacy instruction to adults throughout the county. Visit our website and sign up for a digital library card today. And now I'm going to hand it over to Sean Gilbert from the League of Women Voters, Diablo Valley.
Albert, it says I can't, I'm not visible.
Albert, I can't do spotlight.
Sorry, one moment, please, while I take care of this problem. Go ahead, Sean.
Okay. Thank you, Albert. Good afternoon. My name is Sean Gilbert. On behalf of the Contra Costa County Library, the League of Women Voters Diablo Valley, the League of Women Voters West Contra Costa County, and Contra Costa TV, welcome to this community conversation webinar, Measure X 2023, the allocations, lessons learned, and ensuring equity in 2024. Before we begin, let's review a few housekeeping items. This is a Zoom webinar, so the audience, microphones are muted and videos are turned off. If you have questions for the moderator or panelists, please submit them by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Today's webinar is being recorded live. It will be posted later to the YouTube channels of the Contra Costa County Library and the League of Women Voters Diablo Valley. Site addresses for those YouTube channels will be displayed on screen at the end of the program. Additionally, Contra Costa Television is broadcasting today's webinar and will be rebroadcasting the program. The dates and times will be posted on the screen at the end of the webinar as well. Contra Costa Television is available to watch on Comcast Channel 27, AT&T Uverse Channel 99, Astound Channel 32, and online at contracostatv.org. The contact information for today's panelists, along with the date and subject of our next community conversation, will also be posted at the end of this program. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan grassroots organization working to protect and expand voting rights and ensure everyone is represented in our democracy. We empower voters and defend democracy through advocacy, education, and litigation at the local, state, and national levels. The League of Women Voters of the United States believes that a democratic government depends upon informed and active participation in all levels of government. We invite you to join the League of Women Voters and support its work. You can join the League by visiting lwvc.org/join. The League of Women Voters supports equal opportunity in meeting basic human needs. The League of Women Voters of the United States believes that one of the goals of social policy in the United States should be to promote self-sufficiency for individuals and families, and that the most effective social programs are those designed to prevent or reduce poverty. Persons who are unable to work, whose earnings are inadequate, or for whom jobs are not available have the right to an income and/or services sufficient to meet their basic needs for food, shelter, and access to health care. It is now my sincere pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Demlis Johnson. Demlis Johnson III grew up in Richmond's Iron Triangle neighborhood. His family later relocated to Pittsburgh, where he graduated from Pittsburgh High School. Mr. Johnson graduated from Howard University with a degree in communications. In the 2018 election cycle, he made history by becoming the youngest person to ever be elected to the Richmond City Council. In 2020, Mr. Johnson received a master's degree in public affairs with UC Berkeley's Goldman School of Public Policy. He is currently a district representative for Contra Costa Supervisor, Federal Glover. Demlis, thank you.
And thank you, Sean, for that lovely introduction. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the webinar hosted by the League of Women Voters in partnership with the Contra Costa Library. As mentioned, today's theme is Measure X 2023, the allocations, lessons learned, and ensuring equity in 2024. Now, before we get too deep into our fun today, I want to introduce our three panelists. Tonight we have with us Supervisor Ken Carlson, who has a long history of public service with deep roots in Contra Costa County. He attended schools in both Pleasant Hill and Concord and graduated from Brigham Young University with a BA in communications. He traveled to Seoul, Korea for 18 months of missionary work, where he learned Korean and taught English. In December 1988, he graduated from the Los Madonnas College Law Enforcement Academy and began his career as a Concord police officer, where he served for 29 years. Supervisor Carlson served on the Pleasant Hill City Council for 10 years, including a term as mayor. He authored the Inclusive City Resolution, which states that Pleasant Hill is a welcoming community for all residents, and promotes the protection of human rights, social justice, equality, diversity, and social well-being. Ken Carlson was elected to the Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors on November 8th, 2022, and took the oath of office on January 2nd, 2023. His election was historic in that he is the first LGBTQIA+ to hold a position on the board. Supervisor Ken Carlson. Our next panelist is Mariana Moore, who serves as the Senior Director of the Ensuring Opportunity Campaign to End Poverty in Contra Costa, a cross-sector initiative that engages residents, elected officials, social sector organizations, businesses, labor, policymakers, academia, faith-centered organizations, and philanthropy in a collective effort to eliminate poverty in our community. Ensuring Opportunity achieves this goal by addressing the root causes of poverty and then working to change the policies and systems that perpetuate inequities. In her work with Ensuring Opportunity, Mariana focuses on housing, healthcare access for immigrants, food security, livable wages, and justice system reform. Mariana served on the county's advisory body for the 2020 census and currently chairs the Measure X Community Advisory Board and on the core committee of the county's new Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. Our final panelist, Dr. Kendra Carr. Dr. Kendra Carr is the co-director of the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice and is deeply committed to transformative programming and addresses the needs of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and marginalized communities. Dr. previously worked as Chief Program Officer and Senior Director of Research Leadership, a national nonprofit that promotes gender and racial equity. For nearly a decade, she served as principal, vice principal, and dean of students at an all-girls high school in Oakland, California, that served predominantly BIPOC, low-income girls. During her tenure, she introduced restorative justice as an institutional practice It created opportunities for students, families, and community-based organizations to partner with support student engagement and achievement. Dr. Carr's research interest includes critical race feminist pedagogies, youth participatory action research methods, as she facilitated 3 youth-led research studies. Ladies and gentlemen, these are our esteemed panelists for tonight, and we have a really wonderful program laid out. Each panelist will get 10 to 15 minutes to present, and then we'll go into Q&A. First, we like to start with our first panelist, Supervisor Carlson.
Good evening. Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate the introduction. I do have some slides for you, but just wind the clock back to 2020. As we entered the pandemic, we're struggling through the pandemic. We put in front of the voters Measure X, an additional sales tax initiative to raise funds to meet the needs of the community. And it's interesting because, 2020 was a difficult time. The uncertainty of the pandemic, families facing financial insecurity, and all these things. And then we are putting on the ballot a sales tax initiative to raise what we anticipated would be over $100 million, almost $120 million a year, to essentially provide services and engage and bring back to the community to fill the gaps and to support our community members. So if we can, I got a couple of slides to share, and we'll talk about a little bit about what's been going on with Measure X. And I will say, I came in a little late to the Measure X allocation party. So as I came onto the board in the beginning of 2023, many of these allocations had already been made, but we want to reiterate our commitment to the goals of every initiative and every decision we make when it comes to allocating our Measure X dollars. So real quick, when we go back and we look at, who's engaged in Measure X, it really is our public, as well as our community advisory board. And again, I came a little late to this to get going, but our community advisory board is really our eyes, our ears, our boots on the ground, giving us the needs of the community. There are so many of our community benefit and nonprofit organizations that are out there providing for the needs of our community members. So we rely heavily on our community advisory board, the work they're doing in evaluating the needs and priorities of our community. Are we able to put the slides up?
Yes, one moment, please.
Okay. The other is, as I came onto the board, so in 2023, another commitment we made as part of Measure X was to have a fiscal oversight board. And it really was to hold the board accountable to the goals and the commitment we made in putting Measure X on the ballot and getting it passed, and then the funding that we allocate out. So we're engaged with a body that's going to actually commit to holding us accountable, because ultimately that's the final group of the partners, is the Board of Supervisors making the decision. And I'll also throw in there that, each of our departments are communicating with us. So whether that's health or fire or the sheriff's office, all of the different county departments, agencies are engaging with us in their vision as to what the needs of the community are as well. Any luck?
Are you not seeing the slide right now?
I am not. That doesn't mean much, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty, it's up there, yeah.
Okay, so if we can go to the next slide. So we should have been partners now. Let me see if I can get my Zoom to work better. There we go. And the next slide. So I know this is hard to read, but we have allocated well over $215 million as we move into the 23-24 fiscal year. And again, that's a lot across, but and I'll, if we go to the next slide and give you a little more information, I'm breaking it down by the goals. So we've allocated or created these goals. So mental well-being, equity in action, healthy communities, intergenerational living. We want to look out for our seniors as well as our youth. And then again, inclusion, welcoming and safe communities. So as we look at our funding priorities and our decision-making, of those that we funded in the 22-23 year, gives you a breakdown of what we have allocated the money to. A significant portion of the front load has been to healthy communities. That's investment in our clinics, our hospitals, those providing services such as food to our communities. And again, things like our Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, when we hear from Dr. Carr. The next slide. So mental health is really been on the forefront of the conversations. And a lot of these different programs include capital improvements. So we're not going to necessarily see the actual physical results of the investments we're making very quickly. Some we will. The investment we've made with our A3 crisis response team, you know, we're staffing up and we're getting those people out there in the community, but there's much more to go. The Family Navigator program, those are in each district across the county. We have someone in our schools working to connect those families and support families by connecting them to services. And of course, we're investing in our medical center to provide greater access to the healthcare and the resources, whether that's in our psych emergency services to all the other facilities that are on site. We've invested in accessible transportation. That's for seniors as well as disabled folks. We've expanded fire services. We're investing in our library buildings. We've expanded, or we piloted, a mental health response team. So our San Ramon Valley fire folks are responding to mental health crises for our youth and adolescents. We worked with the state legislature and we've gotten our illegal dumping initiative passed in the legislature so we can move forward and try and keep our unincorporated areas cleaner. And then youth centers, which I'm really excited about. And based on how the funding worked out, we were able to actually fund 3 potential youth centers in districts 4, 3, and 5. Next slide. There we go. So as we look as we're going forward, we have actually anticipated greater revenues for this fiscal year than initially projected, and as well as some unexpended funds. So just in December, we allocated an additional $9 million on some initiatives. Next slide. Again, a little harder to see, but so as you look, we've invested this $9 million. Again, this is one-time funding. So a lot of the funding we have done is ongoing funding, which we've actually incorporated a COLA. So we've committed funding going forward. However, with overruns or potential meeting higher expectations in our sales tax revenue, then we have one-time funding going ahead. So I did advocate for and was able to arrange for $750,000. Thank you to my board for supporting this. Move forward with $750,000 out of this one-time funding for animal services, for spay-neuter clinics. We were able to find additional funding for a 3rd youth center. We're moving forward with not only our African American Holistic Wellness Center hub study, but moving forward with the actual implementation. We did work with our clerk recorder and our diversity project there, as well as $1 million for parks across the unincorporated portions of the county, additional funding for San Ramon fire training. And then we really just kind of threw out $1 million as well for mental health services and food insecurity that we're still working on what the where those will be actually spent and how they'll be provided to the community. The next slide. So again, equity in action was one of the goals, and we're trying to meet that. And a big part of that is our Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, moving forward with our feasibility study for the Wellness Hub, and also refugee resettlement resources. And the next slide. You want to know more? Of course, there is a Measure X page. We're trying to make it much more user-friendly and attractive. but you can go online and learn more about it. And if you go to the next slide, there'll be my info to tell you how to get a hold of me. I'm happy to answer questions, happy to continue the partnership and work for the betterment of the community, putting the Measure X dollars to the best use possible. And with that, I'm happy for any questions when the time arises.
All right. Thank you so much, Supervisor Carlson. We will get back to you on the Q&A part. Up next, we do have the magnificent Mariana Moore, who once again is the chair of the Community Advisory Board that Supervisor Carlson had mentioned. Chair Moore, take it away.
Thank you, Demlis. Appreciate you being moderator today. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Mariana Moore, and I work for a nonprofit in Contra Costa, the Ensuring Opportunity Campaign, which is part of RCF Connects. And I'm also the chair of the Measure X Community Advisory Board, which sometimes I might slip up and call it MixCab. I try not to use acronyms, but in case I do, that's what it means. Really glad to be here today. I appreciate Supervisor Carlson laying out some of the history and the allocations of Measure X. And my perspective is someone in the community who cares deeply about equity and about justice and about access and about inclusion. And so from those values, I want to sort of walk you briefly through, from the community perspective, some of the history of Measure X Community Advisory Board and our work with it deeply in partnership with the community over these last 3 years. And I want to start, as Supervisor Carlson said, we did have, a pandemic happen in the middle of the campaign to have the community approve Measure X, the sales tax, half-cent sales tax. So that kind of was a, shaky beginning in a way. We're like, is the community going to want to embrace this? Everyone's very scared. If you remember back to the days of early COVID, a lot of uncertainty. And I'm so proud of this community for saying yes, saying yes to invest in our infrastructure and to help vulnerable communities and to come together to make ourselves stronger through this sales tax. So I just want to thank all of you watching who voted. I'm glad you voted however you voted, and especially if you voted yes on that. Thank you so much. And so I appreciate the League of Women Voters doing this webinar. I think it's the third one that we've done on Measure X that I've been involved with, because I do think we have that accountability to the community and to all of you as voters and stakeholders in our beloved Contra Costa. I want to start by sort of explaining briefly that when the Measure X Community Advisory Board came together in early 2021, at the structure, let me tell you that there's 27 members. 10 of them are appointed by the 5 supervisors, so 2 per district. Then there's 7 at-large members, and then there's 10 alternates. So it's a large body that's very carefully structured, that's sort of democratically, the representation across the county geographically, and the membership itself has always been very diverse in every way imaginable, which I think is one of its strengths. We do meet monthly. It's on the 3rd Wednesday, starting at 5 o'clock. Our meetings are televised and also recorded. If you Google the Contra Costa Board of Supervisors Agenda Center, you can find a link to our meetings and the meeting packets, and we very much welcome you to participate. So we started meeting and we were charged with doing a very quick needs assessment. So in a period of about, I think, 6 months, maybe 3 months, it's a little bit of a blur. Again, in the middle of a pandemic, we're trying to figure out Zoom. We actually had weekly meetings where we had panels of county department representatives, community-based organizations, and residents themselves who are impacted by harms and vulnerabilities in the community. So we had these panel presentations on various different issues, housing, hunger, health, etc. And from that, we developed our first set of recommendations to the Board of Supervisors at the end of 2021. And that first round of funding, again, it was about $120 million plus some one-time funding. And I know Supervisor Carlson went over the numbers. So it's a lot of money and a lot of time pressure and a lot of responsibility that we felt together. To guide our work, we developed a vision statement, which is Contra Costa County will have the necessary funds to invest in systems, and sustain robust systems of care, and the social and public services necessary to support a vibrant community and ensure that all county residents have equitable opportunities to thrive. We also establish values, equity, justice, inclusion, and compassion. And then we establish operating principles, so how we want to work together. So that included in the importance of a strong safety net, prevention being as important as, addressing current system gaps, transformational ideas, leveraging other funding, and recognizing that things are interconnected and intersectional in residents' lives and therefore must be in our systems of care as well. Naming inequities and disparities, and lastly, fostering a culture of inclusion, welcoming, and belonging. And I wanted to give that baseline sort of knowledge to all of us because I think it really has informed and infused and driven how the Measure X Community Advisory Board has done its work together. So in that first round of funding at the end of 2021 and into early 2022, we experienced a time of growing pains, I will say. And I want to step back and say first that this was the first time, it was a culture shifting moment in this county, because usually the county board of supervisors and the departments and the county administrator's office have a sort of annual budget making process, and there's budget hearings where the public can weigh in. And so this process of having this much more in-depth, community inclusive, values-driven process was pretty revolutionary for this county. And we were all embarking on this adventure together, again, in the middle of a pandemic under a very, very high pressure time frame to get the dollars out the door. So of course, there were kind of growing pains. And in the subsequent years after the first round of allocations, we've revised our bylaws to more clarify the roles of the Measure X Community Advisory Board and the Board of Supervisors and the County Administrator, and sort of dealt with some of the hiccups of role confusion that had happened. And really just sort of learned how to be a well-functioning system together, which I think we've done. I think that, let's see, what else should I address here? Sorry, give me a moment. And then, a couple of months ago in December, the board approved the second round of funding for about 4.5 million, which is a much smaller amount, and I'll explain why in a minute. And this time, the Measure X Community Advisory Board, as last time, really invited the community to come in and express where are you hurting? What do you need? What's happening? Where are you vulnerable? What ideas do you have? What hopes do you have? What aspirations? And from that, we put together funding recommendations and delivered them to the Board of Supervisors late last year. And we are pleased that the Board of Supervisors, who also come in with their own ideas, they have their own constituencies in their ears, of course, that is, part of democracy as well. But by and large, the Board of Supervisors, to a greater extent than in the first round, did fund many of the recommendations that the Community Advisory Board made. And I should explain that Measure X is a general sales tax, a general sales tax, which means that the Board of Supervisors are responsible ultimately for allocating the funds. And the advisory board role, as the title suggests, is advisory. So the advisory board has a great responsibility without a lot of authority, because it is the Board of Supervisors appropriately who do allocate general sales tax revenues. So I just wanted to, sort of explain the roles in that sense as well. One of the questions I was asked to address is where is the greatest need in 2024? And I'm just one voice among many, but I will say that from the many, many community members who came out over these past several months to share their observations and needs and wants, it really comes down to essentials of living. So housing costs and housing insecurity are a huge issue, not just in Contra Costa, but definitely, here. People are hungry, so food security was another big one that came up. Health, access to health, especially for immigrants, is an issue that has come up repeatedly. The need, the need for guaranteed basic income, the need to take better care of our elders who have fewer income choices than others of us do. the need for mental health care for young children. So probably none of these needs are surprising to those of us sort of living in the community and paying attention. But we really appreciated the community members who came forward, sometimes quite bravely, to share their personal stories and share their truth. And it really helped inform the Measure X Community Advisory Board recommendations. We're deeply committed to listening to the community, especially those most vulnerable, those most harmed by inequitable systems in the county and elsewhere. So we really, again, adhere to our own principles, our vision, our commitment, our values in formulating our recommendations. Last year, actually in 2022, there was a report that came out. We were fortunate to have a consultant that the county paid for out of Measure X funds to come and do a very deep dive into analyzing and providing feedback and observations about the Measure X Community Advisory Board process. One of her findings was that sort of role confusion that I mentioned earlier, which we have taken steps to address. Also, she noted how sort of compressed and hurried the timeline was for that first round of funding and the Measure X Advisory Board deliberations. I mean, we were meeting weekly for up to 5 hours, at a time. So it was very exhaustive and exhausting. So that report, I believe, is going to be shared on the resource site that the League of Women Voters and the library very helpfully are setting up. So if you're interested in that report, it's a very interesting look back at the history of Measure X and, some of the things we learned by tripping and falling on our face, which is what happens when you start a new initiative and you have time pressure and you have huge responsibility and folks are counting on you. So I encourage you all, in the interest of transparency and community learning, go read that report. It's really, really good. So I think the other thing that I want to say, and I'm looking at time, so I'll close shortly, is that one thing I think is that most community members and taxpayers are not aware of. It's very important that you know, just to know, is that most of the Measure X dollars are spoken for, meaning that in that first round of funding, there is a large pot of ongoing funding, meaning year after year it is allocated and sort of spoken for, and then a smaller pot of one-time funding that was used for things like capital projects for the hospital, county hospital, things like that. And so those ongoing dollars, let's call them, were allocated out primarily to county departments, the health department, social services, et cetera, for programs that have ongoing costs. And then as Supervisor Carlson mentioned, there's kind of a cost of living adjustment that's kind of built in each year. And so those ongoing allocations and the COLA or cost of living adjustment are, sort of projected to take up most of the revenues that come in each year. And so sometimes I talk to community members who say, oh, you have $120 million a year, and what could we spend it on next year? And it's like, well, actually, it's really well invested on good programs. And that's going to be what it's invested in next year as well. So I think that's one of the Measure X messages that hasn't really gotten out yet. There are sometimes one-time excess funds. This coming up in the next couple of months, the Board of Supervisors will be looking at about $28 million in one-time funding, and the Measure X Community Advisory Board will be providing recommendations on how those funds could be invested. So we encourage you to come to the advisory board meetings and get involved, or send us letters and let us know. So there will be occasional pots of funds like that are available. The majority of the sort of ongoing revenues are spoken for, allocated in an ongoing way. So I think that's one thing I wanted to make sure was a takeaway for folks. And then I think what's next in terms of the advisory board, given that most of those funds are now spoken for, we will be monitoring the implementation of those funds, ensuring and working with the County Board of Supervisors and departments to ensure that the community voice continues to be heard and how the specifics of how a funded program is implemented. So there's youth centers that are coming online. There's a new African American Wellness Hub and Resource Center. There's other programs that are sort of in the planning and rolling out stage, and it's really important for all of us and all of you to be involved with that. So that's one role that the Measure X Advisory Board will continue to have. Also, we have started conversations with the Board of Supervisors and the departments around performance metrics, because again, this is taxpayer money. We hold that in serious, trust, and you have entrusted us with your tax dollars and with your sort of communal support of folks who are struggling, right? So we have to make sure that those dollars are spent well, are the impacts are shared transparently, and that the folks it's intended to benefit indeed do benefit. So I'm going to stop there, and thanks so much for this opportunity to speak with you. I apologize to the translator. I'm sure I went way too fast. I will have to buy you dinner. But anyway, glad to be here and open to questions when the time comes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair Moore. That was excellent. That was really great. Up next, we have the co-director of the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, Dr. Kendra Carr. You're up.
Thank you so much. I'm just gonna make sure this is working. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Kendra Carr, one of the co-directors of the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. Peter Kim is the other co-director. He is a participant in the webinar today. Hey, Peter. We are really grateful for every invitation we receive to participate in community dialogues and the sharing of ideas. So thank you to the Diablo Valley and West Contra Costa County League of Women Voters, our colleagues at the library and CCTV for hosting today. We're really grateful for the invitation to share from the perspective of an office that's funded by Measure X. So we've heard from the panelists, Supervisor Carlson and Mariana, who really laid out the background and history of Measure X. And Mariana described the Measure X Community Advisory Board's role and really making space for community members to be a part of the decision-making and resource allocation. And so our office, the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, is founded upon the community determining what it needed from a county department. The core committee, which is a group of community-based organizations and alliances that have a strong history of advocacy. They've led much of the racial equity and social justice work in the county. They led a 2-year process, a research and a community planning process to establish the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. And so it's our intention as the co-directors that the office really remain in tune and responsive to what the community needs and what the community sees as the solutions to make the county a more equitable place to live. So I'm going to share, as the Measure X funded office, just our office's role in ensuring equity in 2024. I'll share some of our priorities. But I just want to start with our vision and purpose. So we envision Contra Costa County as a community where everyone can experience liberation, where they can live in homes and neighborhoods where they're safe and healthy and thriving. And so the purpose of our office is twofold. One, it's to increase education, resources, and policies that address structural racism and the impact that it has on community residents. And then also our focus is to assess, support, and coordinate the county's equity work for those who are marginalized because of their race, their ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, immigration status, preferred language, their physical or mental abilities, and their experiences of trauma and violence. And so, as I mentioned before, in that 2-year process, there were over 3,300 county residents, community members who completed surveys or attended listening sessions and community conversations. And overwhelmingly, community members expressed a desire for increased support and advocacy toward addressing harms created by the public systems and really decreasing the forms of violence that they're experiencing in their communities. They wanted resources around healing, food justice, immigrant inclusion, housing, and safety. Just really more meaningful community engagement and participation in our public systems.
I don't want to interrupt, sorry, doctor, but your slides are not quite all showing up. I think it's a little bit cut off. I'm not sure if you can see if there's a way to... There you go. That's better.
Is that better?
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you.
Maybe because I'm moving is it cut off now when I move my screen? Let me see something. Sorry. 1 second, you all.
No, this is fine. I see the whole thing now.
Okay, even still?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Um, so our office and co-director structure was set up so that we maintain a dual focus of community engagement and participation, um, and also a focus on county-wide and systems engagement. So I'm first going to share our community-focused priorities and projects that we'll develop, and in some cases pilot in this first year of our existence. So first, we will conduct a landscape analysis of racial inequity and harms experienced by residents throughout the county. The wonderful thing is that we don't have to start from scratch. Over the last few years, there have been studies and reports done that really document the inequities and harms experienced by community members. So what we see as our work is to gather and synthesize and build upon those reports and put them together in a way that's accessible, transparent, a way that the community can access them, county staff, community organizations. Also a part of our work towards providing reparative justice in our most impacted communities, we're stewarding the process that both Mariana and Supervisor Carlson spoke about, which is the process toward establishing the African American Holistic Wellness and Resource Hub in the county. So we've already convened the steering committee of community members who were appointed by the Board of Supervisors to really design and lead the process to secure a vendor who's going to conduct the feasibility study. And that study will let us know what kinds of services and resources are most needed. How should we structure those supports? Where should they be located? And the projected costs. And so we'll present that feasibility study to the Board of Supervisors in November of this year. And then you also heard Mariana share that in December of last year, 2023, the board acted on the recommendation of the Measure X Community Advisory Board and allocated $1 million. And so our office has been assigned to administer that recent Measure X funding allocation. We also will provide organizational capacity building and technical assistance grants for emerging and small grassroots organizations. We've heard from multiple voices, especially from those smaller community-based organizations. They're providing those much needed critical services to communities, that what they most need is some support around building their organizational capacity so that they can grow and so that they can deliver services more effectively. Ideas like receiving coaching for their leadership team or skills training for their frontline staff, or like strengthening fiscal policies and practices. So we want to be able to provide that assistance to emerging grassroots organizations. We also really want to be responsive to communities, especially during moments of crisis. So we're establishing a small grants fund for local community members and neighborhood groups to conduct healing activities, restorative activities for those who've experienced harms stemming from racial and social inequities. So our goal around these two funding opportunities is to really provide an accessible, community-friendly application process, because community-based organizations have also just shared with us the barriers that they have to applying for funding. And so we want to really respond to the urgency of the need and also provide a model that we can share with our county counterparts in other departments. And then finally, something that we've heard, and that's kind of a theme of today's conversation too, is the desire to see more active and meaningful engagement of community members and residents across all advisory boards and commissions. And so we really want to, assess our current models, our current structures of advisory bodies, and really support departments, support the county to explore what's possible, to make sure we give access to community members. And so the other focus I mentioned, the internal systems focus, we have 4 priorities for this year. We want to take inventory of the county's current racial equity efforts, programs, and initiatives. There are already staff and advisory bodies who are working towards equity, and so we're exploring, how to support through collaboration and partnership, and when it's appropriate, where our office should fully absorb and lead those efforts. We also, the second piece is we want to support, and we will support departments in the development of budget equity statements. And so all departments, as a part of the annual budgeting process, have submitted budget equity statements. Peter and I are reviewing all of those now and providing feedback to the departments. We're really asking them to reflect on how they engaged community in determining their resource allocations, or how they will in the future. That's our first year's work. And then we'll develop a tool in partnership with the Budget Justice Coalition to provide a more structured process for the years to come. We also want to create racial equity action plans. And so we're going to convene an interdepartmental team across county departments to co-design a framework and a tool that all departments can use to create racial equity action plans. We also will adopt a countywide language equity access plan. So in the county, 37% of residents speak a language other than English at home. And so this priority really moves forward work that the Gateways for Growth process already started. They devised a countywide language equity plan. And so we're right now further refining that plan and preparing it for departments to adopt and implement. We want to support, meaningful language access and greater immigrant inclusion. And then finally, we're going to assess the current countywide implicit bias training. We just want to evaluate it for its effectiveness and explore ways to improve the training and refining the scope towards racial equity. And, we've had a request and heard that there's a need for trainings that deal with microaggressions or conflict resolution, and how to really build department cultures that foster trust and equity and inclusion. Time check. I'll just let me know. I forgot to time myself, Dimless. So you'll have to please interrupt if
I
I'm.
was going to let you finish this last slide before I interrupted.
Okay. Then this is not the most exciting slide to end on, but it'll be. But this is a part of the work in setting up a brand new office. And so we're grateful for this upfront investment of resources to build out, our office's infrastructure. And I'll highlight the second two. So during this initial phase, we really want to make sure we're data driven. So we want to develop a formal structure to receive community feedback and concerns and complaints. This was one major ask from the recommendations from that 2-year community feedback process. And so we want to make sure we build out our data infrastructure, a way for us to collect and analyze and disseminate data. And then our communication strategy. This is really tied to our goal to have a consistent presence in the community. So we want to make sure we're able to design outreach and engagement events, like pop-up sites and offices. We want to be engaging in community conversations and workshops. So that's also a part of our goal. All right.
So actually, Dr. Carr.
Yes, I've run out of time. Yep.
We are ahead of schedule. And this is some really good information that you're sharing with the public. So I'm just going to let you go ahead and finish your presentation. I see you have 6 slides left, and I don't want to cut the information off from the people.
Okay. And I'll sounds good. I'll be brief. So what I just laid out is a lot of work, and Peter and I are going to need team members on board with us to accomplish our goals. And so in alignment with the core committee's recommendations, our vision is to have a fully staffed office of 13 team members in 3 years. But the first 4 positions that we're hiring right away are a reconciliation coordinator who's really responsible for developing strategies for historical reconciliation, and the one who will respond to resident concerns that come in. We also will bring in a language equity coordinator, but that's the person who will implement the language equity access plan and really build an immigrant inclusion strategy for our department. We also are bringing on 2 analysts, one that's responsible for data collection. We want to make sure we're using evidence-based reporting we want to make sure we're measuring our outcomes and can tell the story of the impact, the difference that we are making in the county by being there. So we're bringing on a data analyst and then also a budget and policy analyst. And so our goal is to have our first 2 staff members join us by July and the last 2 by October. We also are going to establish a lived experience advisory board that really is integral to the strategic planning and thought partnership. So the lived experience advisory board is going to provide a regular opportunity for community members to provide feedback and critique on our efforts. We see our work as an iterative process, so we want our office to remain flexible and responsive to all those changing dynamics and the needs of those who are most impacted by inequities in our communities. So the members of the Lived Experience Advisory Board are going to provide us with that real-time perspective of what's happening across our communities in Contra Costa. It's also going to be a space that's an incubator for community members to acquire experiences, build their capacity to be equity champions in their respective communities, and be credible messengers for our office and that larger movement for equity in the county. So it's a 20-member board, 10 seats will be district-based and 10 will be at large, and they must have our goal with lived experience. That just means we want them to have direct experience with or have had some sort of intimate exposure to the kinds of harms and traumas caused by racial and social inequities. So the onboarding and training process is going to be, really developed out. We're going to prioritize language access and inclusive practices such as translation services and other accommodations to meet the diverse communication, mobility needs, and to really enable that full participation from all of our members. We'll also provide stipends so that we can remove any financial barriers. Our intent is to value everyone's time and contributions equally. And some people have a real financial hardship when they contribute significant amounts of time. And that, this policy, it's not a common practice across the county. So we're actually proposing advocating for a broad change in county practice and culture regarding compensation for those who provide service and leadership. And so let me just share, this will be close to the final slide. So this slide is just, it shows the categories of harm and exposure to violence that we discovered from the survey that were a part of the recommendations presented in 2022. And so just to ensure we have representatives that can speak to the greatest needs of our community, the most pressing challenges within our systems, these are the categories of harm and violence from the report that we're going to be looking at and hoping to bring on members to the Lived Experience Advisory Board who have those relevant lived experiences. And so with that, I will go ahead and stop now. And thank you all and open to any questions. Look, thank you. I had to put up the thank you slide. All right.
All right. Once again, thank you to all of our panelists. And thank you, Dr. Carr. Thank you, Supervisor Carlson. Thank you, Chair Moore. Your information and knowledge has been invaluable. At this point in time, I would like to invite our audience members who have not already to submit questions to our Q&A. And if we can bring all of our panelists back, we will jump right into it. And if all of our panelists can turn on their cameras so our audience can see your beautiful faces once again. All right. And as our audience members put questions into the chat, I will go ahead and ask some of the prepared questions that I have here. And seeing as though we're fresh off of Dr. Carr's presentation, we will start with you. So our first question is, Is Measure X improving equity in the county? How so?
Well, I may need to lean on those who've been around just a little bit longer. So, what I forgot, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but Peter and I started late 2023. So this is about three months. And just from, our initial round of conversations with county staff, with leadership in the community-based organizations, with, our ongoing conversations with the core committee, we've met with all the supervisors and their staff. I would say that there's a lot of excitement and sighs of relief that the office is finally here, that it's finally open, because there have been a lot of initiatives that were put on hold until the office, opened to take them on. And so I definitely, I hope so. Peter and I want to make sure that that we demonstrate the value of this office. Um, but it's going to take some time for us to be able to tell that story a little bit more deeply. But I'll say, just by, from these initial conversations and some of the work that we're able to step into and support, I want to say yes. I want to lean into that optimistic side. We're just getting started, so invite us back in a year for next year's conversation, and we hope to have more just evidence, storytelling, more examples of initiatives that we're able to implement. I'd love to be able to report on what we just shared as our priorities for this year.
Most definitely, most definitely. Hopefully all of us can come back and revisit this conversation. So the next question goes to you, Supervisor Carlson. Since you came on the board after the initial decisions, which programs do you see developing that will have a community changing impact?
Oh my gosh, I would say all of them. The
Hmm.
issue is, you look at the work that Kendra and Peter are doing at the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, our mental health response team. I mean, so it's slow. We're definitely not as fast as our MX cab was. They jumped in, and I just want to. This is my opportunity, I think, to throw in my thanks and my gratitude to everyone on the Measure X advisory body, because they really did. They devoted so many hours and so much time and so much energy. You can't say enough about the hard work they did, because they are in many ways, working with all of those people out in our community that need the support the most. And so their voice carries a lot of weight, and it brings a lot of important information to us. So with that, like I say, everything will. It's just kind of a slow rollout. You're looking at capital improvement projects. Expanding our psych emergency services building is not going to happen overnight, but getting financial support to operate the Office of Racial Equity, Social Justice, to improve food, healthcare access, getting everyone signed up for healthcare who's eligible. One of the things I advocated for was getting money for Stand Together Contra Costa, legal representation for those that are facing deportation hearings and are seeking asylum to be in this country. So there are things that are going to have an immediate impact, and I think they're going to be smaller, but we're just ramping up, and it's going to be so impactful. And as we look at long term, we're going to meet greater needs for so many of those, especially in the area of healthcare and well-being and mental health and behavioral health support. So
very nice.
We're getting there.
The fun has just begun, huh?
That's right.
Very nice. Very nice. And Chair Moore, now that the current batch of Measure X funding has been allocated, what lessons have we learned, and how do we ensure equitable implementation of those funds moving forward?
That's a small, easy question. And I'm going to actually start my answer by adding on to what Dr. Carr said a little bit ago about the impact and how can we be sure that equity has increased, because that's the name of the game for all of us, I think. And what I want to draw our attention to, and I will answer your question, Demos, I promise.
Of course, you have it.
is, the what and the how. So the what is like, what has the Board of Supervisors in their wisdom invested in that is increasing equity in our county? And I think the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, as Dr. Carr said, it's early days, but very promising early days. I think the African American Wellness Hub and Resource Center is another example. Another example is Stand Together Contra Costa, which provides legal representation to immigrants and newcomers to our community who are trying to resolve their cases without legal representation, which is horrendous. And thank you, Supervisor Carlson, for supporting that. So those are just 3 examples. There's many more. So I think that's the what. And the how, which I'm always a student of, is how do we as a community come together to share our aspirations and ideas and challenges, and then collectively arrive at a sense of priorities and urgency. And I think the Measure X Community Advisory Board has been a lab experiment, but I think it's been, for the most part, an effective one, where we really worked hard through those vision and values and operating principles and just our practices. We had language access, interpretation in American Sign Language and Spanish, for example. So really having it be a sort of Petri dish where we bring together the best practices in this county and introduce some new practices so that folks feel welcome and they feel included. And I think that's a really important fact, because if anyone's ever looked at the county budget, it's like 800 pages of numbers, and it's overwhelming and intimidating. And it doesn't feel, and I think actually the county administrator's office and the board are working hard to make it more like understandable and inclusive, which is great. But the county budget process has traditionally been sort of like the experts come together and here are the financial projections. And of course, that's really important to do that. But the question and the challenge becomes, how do we have the community, the taxpayers and the community members and all of us who live and work and shop in Contra Costa feel like it's our budget, right? And so I think that that's a work in progress. I think the Measure X Community Advisory Board has tried to model and embody, those intentions and those practices. So I hope that the how of how we go about developing our recommendations and how the Board of Supervisors goes about carefully listening to those recommendations and their deliberations, along with the sort of what has been funded, my answer would be yes. Damos, I've managed to completely forget the question you actually asked me. I'm sorry. So I'm passionate about this.
No problem. And the answer you provided was beautiful. But if need repeating, the question was, now that the current batch of Measure X funding has been allocated, what lessons have been learned? And how do we ensure equitable implementation of those funds moving forward?
Yeah, thank you. I think I talked earlier in my remarks, but I'll reiterate them and maybe add to them that most of the funds have now been accounted for and sort of committed for multi-year ongoing funding over the 20-year life of the sales tax. And so again, I think the implementation and the community inclusion and voice is really key, that we continue to walk our talk as the advisory bodies to the board, as community input sessions like Dr. Carr talked about for the Office of Racial Equity. Those practices in an ongoing way ensure transparency, accountability, and success in terms of achieving the goals that were laid out and that the Board of Supervisors intends in making those allocations. And then as I said, there may be occasional sort of pots of funds that come up that are relatively small. I mean, I say $28 million is a large sum of money, but in the context of the county budget, it's, not that big. So any additional pots that come up, we have a continuing responsibility to come together with these practices, with this transparency, to be in community as we ask the community, what do you need and want? What ideas do you have? What opportunities do you see? And to listen deeply and continuously as we move forward.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And Chair Moore mentioned ongoing costs, and this is a question that perhaps Dr. Carr and Supervisor Carlson can kind of tag team. And it has to do with the ongoing costs of the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. As we all know, Measure X is sunsets in 20 years. But the prayer is that the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice doesn't sunset in 20 years. How do we continue funding for this department, once this measure sunsets? And Dr. Carr, if you'd like to start, and Supervisor Carlson, if you'd like to wrap, that would be perfect.
Yeah. Supervisor, I'm going to tease you a little bit. Supervisor Carlson, how do we? But it's something that we've shared. Peter and I have shared with the Equity Committee. For those who don't, that's Supervisors Glover and Supervisor Joya. Um, the level of funding required to fully build out the vision for the office. That's 13 staff with regional champions in each district. And our current funding, 100% Measure X, our current funding will allow us to have 6 full-time staff members. So it's not enough to build out that full vision. So I just want to say, we're thinking strategically. I think timing really matters, and so we're thinking really strategically. We're asking the questions. I want to say, I feel like this is not answering the question, but these are my thoughts about the question. There seems to be a lot of support and just like high hopes for what our office can achieve. And if you come to or listen in on board meetings, our office is highlighted in some way, brought into a lot of conversations as kind of like that place that'll figure out our next steps as a county related to a wide range of equity concerns. So like I said in the last answer, this year it's really our aim to demonstrate the value of this work in the county. Um, and so, we're just going to continue to lay out that vision that the core committee set for us. It's our vision as well. But I think time will tell and we'll have those conversations. The annual budgeting process is a time for us to present our growth, how we want to expand in the following year. We will do that. But the decision, we need everyone around the table. We're really grateful for all of we have a lot of community advocates who will also come and share, and share their voice during public comment and that sort of thing. Our lived experience advisory board will be another place to advocate of advocacy. And so we plan to just, participate like all the other departments do in that annual budgeting process and make our requests clear. But we've already shared them. And so I just want to say it's known already that we need a larger budget to fully implement the vision of the office.
Well, way to lobby. That was good. No, because the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice is a high priority for, I think, the entire board. I speak for myself because I'm not 5 in 1, I'm 1. But again, it's truly integral. It's the challenge we face in the whole budgeting process, right? Everyone has their priority. When we talk to our departments, there's clearly an end mark for Measure X. It lives for 20 years. Does not mean that we couldn't go back to the voters and ask for their support again. But when we have these conversations, there is an end date and we need to plan for that. And so we really need to be strategic throughout all of our funding decisions. We are building a solid reserve. The hope is there's never a downturn again that we've experienced before. And that might even continue to help us cushion the blow. But it really is a partnership. The community, again, each of our department heads, and those that are participating in the conversation, because essentially there could be, an end date to it. And again, this is the challenge we face when we're making all these budgeting decisions, or how do we prioritize them? What are the needs of the community? If Kendra and Peter have done such a fantastic job, who knows where we'll be in 20 years, right? There's just so many things, the work we do at our medical center and providing greater access to healthcare. Do we diminish some of the impacts that the community feels when it comes to, food insecurity or meeting all the social determinants of health and making our community one of the healthiest communities in the state, let alone the nation? So, if we can keep working at closing these gaps, whether it's in equities or it's healthcare or it's mental health. So asking me to think 20 years out, that's hard, but we need to do it. We really do. And priorities might change. We don't know what's coming. We're facing a challenge. Again, like Chair Moore mentioned, we do have the prospect of another 28, almost 29 million in one-time funding that could come forward. I'm a little cautious right now because we don't know what the state budget's going to have do to us. So if we're impacted by the state budget, do we want to take away services? or do we want to fill the gap? So there's some things going on in the budget that make it a little bit tenuous as to the last thing I ever want to see is us providing a service and then suddenly say we can't afford to do it anymore and just suddenly end it, because that leaves too many in our world that are impacted in a negative way, that suddenly to have a need being met and the next minute they don't. And that really is not how we want to do business.
Most definitely. Thank you for that. And Chair Moore, I'd like to bring you back in. How are allocated funds by projects being monitored in terms of performance metrics?
That is a great question. I think that's part of the beautiful work in progress of the evolution of these funds and how there's transparency and accountability out to the community. In the sort of traditional historic county budgeting process in this county, the Board of Supervisors, hears from department heads that each submit budget requests, and then the Board of Supervisors, makes the allocations, and then the departments sort of go off and do their thing, and they might occasionally report back to the Board of Supervisors, and it's a very good structured process. I think a lot of us in the community, and I think within the county as well, see Measure X funds through a slightly different lens, that because all county government is funded by tax dollars of one kind or another, but because we went to the community in 2020 in the middle of a pandemic and said, please tax yourselves more to help the most vulnerable and to address these unmet needs and these gaps. I think there's a special responsibility that accrues from that we must be erring on the side of transparency and accountability and visibility. That's something that Measure X Community Advisory Board has tried to model as we've built this kind of process of making recommendations. And as I said, our attention is now shifting into exactly what the questioner is asking around the metrics and accountability, and rightly so. And that's still sort of being developed. There's been some early steps. And so the Board of Supervisors and the Measure X Community Advisory Board held a joint meeting in December for the first time ever. And so we all met in a conference room in the county admin building. And so instead of the board being up on the dais and community sort of down below, it was very kind of co-equally structured in a physical sense, which I think felt beautiful for the community. And we got lots of positive feedback on that. And that's neither here nor there in a way, but I think that the intentionality that we approach who's at the table literally and how are we determining how to measure the success of these taxpayer investments. And in that meeting, we asked department heads to come and share who had received the first round of Measure X funding a couple years ago, to share what the impacts have been to date. And then we asked questions. And I think from that process, we have the kind of grounding to evolve into a more comprehensive and sophisticated set of performance metrics. And I think that, again, is a work in progress. So I'd love to come here next year and share exactly how that, was invented, collaboratively with county government and with the Measure X advisory body members and department heads, and input from community always along the way. So I think that's our next body of work, honestly, is to, come up with a beautiful, innovative, new, transparent and inclusive and equitable way, right, to measure impact for those who need the services most, whether it's fire services or health services or, African Americans who are struggling in our community, like whoever it is that the funds are intended for, how did we do? It's really important to ask that question, and we welcome community input as we start that body of work.
And we all look forward to Contra Costa County continuing to innovate. And you mentioned fire protection. This next question perhaps builds on your response to the previous one, and maybe even Supervisor Carlson can chime in. We have an audience member who's particularly interested in fire protection, prevention, vegetation management, and community education in terms of preparedness and prevention. Is fire/climate a priority for Measure X? Are funds going to West County and the East Bay Hill region in terms of fire and climate being under harm? All the harm categories seem interpersonal and not environmental.
Yes, that's an easy one to answer in a variety of different ways. Fire prevention, mitigation efforts across the county, that includes West County. training in our fire resources. So, there was a significant investment made in a variety of ways on that, but also on climate resiliency and climate equity are priorities that were addressed as well. So yes, and that again, this is the hardest part, at least for me as a board member, is they're all really impactful. There's all these priorities. The last we were told we had $4.7 million in one-time funding ask. In our last go round when we actually did give out 9 million, but we got from all of our departments, including fire, asks that well exceeded 4.7 million. It was much, let's just say 10 times higher, if not more. So it's really hard. And this is where the work that the CAB has done is really important to get those priorities to us to meet the needs of the community. But it is really hard to say, I can't give you everything you're asking for, or I just can't fund all the needs. And that's where it's just really got to be, what are the priorities? How can we do that? So we did climate, fire, all part of that. We've made a resilience investment in our conservation and development group. So there's a lot going on. And matter of fact, if you do go to the Measure X website, I know it's not as efficient or as clean as I'd like it to be, but it does break down where we've put that the money into those investments and where we kind of applied it as far as our goals, whether that's a healthy and safe community or however we chose to to meet the goals. We're fill in the blanks.
Thank you, Supervisor. And Dr. Carr, I'd like to bring you back into the conversation. Not that you've left or anything, but just want to make sure that we hear your voice one more time. How will the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice interact with the Measure X Community Advisory Board to ensure equity in the recommendations? If so, how?
Ooh, Mariana, let's start planning. One thing, so the core committee actually presented to the Measure X Community Advisory Board, updates. And so that's definitely one way that we can explore. We haven't talked, formally about a structure, but I also will say that many of the Measure X Community Advisory Board members are, they're a part of the core committee. They're, leaders who we have talked to on our listening tour, gathered information from in terms of their needs and how they want to see our office prioritize our work. And so that is, that's a really, thank you for planting the seed for that. We can plan. I'll also say that the Measure X Community Advisory Board has been, a model. We've looked at, their bylaws, just the structure of their work as we're structuring the lived experience advisory board. We've also looked at it as we've supported the African American Holistic Wellness Steering Committee. And so they are a model, and there are some lessons learned about how to, make sure communication is clear and we're working towards the same goals. The lessons Mariana mentioned are also lessons that we're learning from. So that we can set up structures differently, set expectations differently. So yeah, thank you for that question. I don't know if anyone else has more to share, but you planted the seed, Dimlis, is what I'm saying.
Well, if anything else, we like to bring folks together with these webinars. Chair Moore, if you had anything that you'd like to add, please feel free.
I tend to be a big systems thinker and look at how all the pieces on the chessboard fit together. And so I really want to +1 what Dr. Carr is saying. I think there's a number of fronts and avenues in the county right now where equity is centered and resident voice is centered. And I'm really excited about where this county is going. And I think all of them are additive, whether or not they're literally coordinated. I think all these different efforts right now to center and lift up the voices of residents that are most harmed by system inequities, by racism, by structural injustice. Like, all of us want to make that better. And I think there's tremendous energy on the Board of Supervisors around that. I'm so glad that the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice is going to be a central place to sort of organize that energy and direct it in positive places. And it's just as a wonderful feeling on the Community Advisory Board for Measure X that there's sort of others doing the work in their own lanes, and those lanes kind of connect and intersect in beautiful ways. So yeah, it's a very exciting time in this county for that work.
Most definitely. Thank you for that. So this is a question for all of the panelists. Next month is the primary, and on the ballot is California Proposition 1, Behavioral Health Services Program and Bond Measure. It authorizes $6.38 billion in bonds to build mental health treatment facilities for those with mental health and substance challenges, and provides housing for the homeless. If this measure was to pass, how will this impact your work in terms of Measure X? I know, as you mentioned, Dr. Carr, the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice has been working with the African American Holistic Wellness Center. Supervisor Carlson, Chair Moore, you mentioned that a lot of the funding had went to the county health facilities, as well as the San Ramon Fire Department, getting involved with the behavioral health of the youth and individuals who need those assistance. How do you see the passing of this proposition impacting that work in the funding from Measure X to these programs?
That's a hard one, because there are good things in Prop 1 and there are some challenging things in Prop 1. We would need to find additional funding because we would lose state funding for some of our behavioral health programs, but we would also gain some funding and opportunities as well. So it's just a matter of, we're going to have to look at it. Prop 1 goes through, then we're going to have to look at how do we restructure and where will the gaps be. And I will tell you, because I think the league was with me at our mental health commission just 2 weeks ago and had this very conversation. And Dr. Tavano and our mental health folks are really working hard to kind of structure a new plan. How that'll impact Measure X, it's hard to say. We're committed deeply to behavioral health, our A3 and other responses that we can provide to those suffering mental health crisis and challenges. So I can't see us altering course too heavily. But again, I can only speak for me. And I'm still weighing the impacts, and I will not voice a political opinion here. How's that?
I think what I would add is that consistently throughout the 3 years of life of the Measure X Community Advisory Board, mental health has always shown up as an enormous unmet need. And especially for Black and Brown communities in this county, it is a deeply, tragically unmet need. And so some signs of hope, as Supervisor Carlson mentioned, are the establishment of the African American Wellness Hub and Resource Center. In this last round of community input for the funding that was just allocated in December, mental health for children, for LGBTQIA+ residents and families, for elders, for youth in our community, for African Americans in our community, were just some of the specific populations and needs that were mentioned as being unmet. And so I think the good news and bad news about Prop 1 is that it can provide much needed resources. That's the good news. And the bad news is it's not going to be nearly enough. So I think my view overall is any dollars that we can, get from state, federal, local sources to be additive with each other and to complement each other and to build on the existing programs that are in place is a good thing.
And let me just throw on, because this gives me an opportunity to soapbox a little bit on, we talk about providing these services, and so not that this is a Measure X thing, but what it leads me to do is go to Sacramento and go to Washington, because we don't have healthcare workers that we need. We don't have behavioral healthcare workers that we need, and we don't have them who provide that support in the way that's appropriate, whether that's language or identity or race, whatever that might be in those areas. So we need to create educational pathways so we can meet the needs. We can't meet the need if we don't have the workers and the healthcare workers and the mental health professionals to do it. So not that that's going to come from Measure X, but that's what we really do need to focus in on a grander scale.
Most definitely. And before we wrap this Q&A portion of tonight's webinar, I want to offer each panelist a final word, word of motivation, one final data point, one final piece of information. The floor is yours, and I'd like to start with Dr. Carr.
All right. Yeah, I just want to thank everyone, the attendees today, for coming out to engage in the community conversation. Thank you for the questions that are coming up. You know, I just want to encourage you all. We'll do our best to share information when we're recruiting for our lived experience advisory board. But we really want, as I mentioned, this office, our priorities to be grounded in the needs of the community. And so if you represent a community-based organization, or if you're a community member with concerns, please get in touch with us, because we're still on this listening tour, really wanting to really be brief. Okay. Yes, really wanting to make sure we fully understand the community's needs, and we're here. So that contact information, please do reach out.
Thank you. Chair Moore?
In a similar vein, the Measure X tax dollars are our tax dollars, and the Measure X decisions are our collective decisions through the channel of the Board of Supervisors, who work for and represent all of you who are listening today and who listen to this in the future. And so we collectively own this work and are accountable to each other to ensure that these dollars are spent in the most equitable, impactful way we can imagine together as a community. So please remember, this is your budget. These are your dollars. We need your voice. There are many channels, including the Measure X Community Advisory Board, but also many other channels, and the weekly Board of Supervisory meetings and their various committees. So if you're not yet involved in being a voice of the community, please jump in and do that. And I'm really appreciate the League of Women Voters for providing so many ways and channels to do that, and also the library for carrying this video for all of this entire series. So thank you to my fellow panelists and to everyone listening and to everyone who made this event possible.
Thank you. Supervisor Carlson, bring us home.
Okay, I'm just going to say thank you to the League of Women Voters. Thank you to Mariana and Kendra for the work you're doing. And of course, our libraries, I love you. But again, thank you. And your voice matters. And I know it's sometimes intimidating to stand in front of the dais and see us up there pontificating, but the MX Cab, they're the friendliest group. They're in touch. And of course, Kendra, the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, they're just one more path to get the word to us. So your voice does matter, and get it out there however you need to do that. And again, I'm here as well. Email, phone calls, whatever it takes.
Yes, indeed. And at this point, I'd like to take 15 seconds of personal privilege just to thank the League of Women Voters, the panelists, and you, the audience members. It's the events like this that not only bring us together around good conversation and good people, but also around education. And, you know, with that, I'd like to toss it back to Sean Gilbert.
Thank you so much, Demlis, and thank you, panelists. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Diablo Valley and West Contra Costa County, the Contra Costa County Library, and CCTV, I extend a genuine thank you to each of our panelists for being here today to offer such an informative and timely conversation about Measure X 2023, the allocations, lessons learned, and ensuring equity in 2024. Thank you to our moderator, Demlis Johnson, and to each of our panelists, Supervisor Ken Carlson, District 4, Chair Mariana Moore, and Dr. Kendra Carr. A big thank you to our audience for being here today and for asking such important valuable questions. Thank you to Pamela Perales for providing simultaneous Spanish interpretation of today's webinar. This service is jointly funded by the Contra Costa County Library and the League of Women Voters Diablo Valley. CCTV will be rebroadcasting today's community conversation on the following days and times. Community conversation will also be available on the YouTube channels of the League of Women Voters Diablo Valley and the Contra Costa County Library. Please save the date for our next community conversation, which will be March 21st at 4 o'clock. The new East Bay Deportation Court, local challenges and opportunities for promoting human rights here at home. Community conversation programs are a partnership between the League of Women Voters Diablo Valley and West Contra Costa County and the Contra Costa County Library and CCTV. The League of Women Voters is a nonprofit organization encouraging informed and active participation in government. The League never endorses or opposes candidates or political parties. The League influences public policy through education and advocacy. We invite community members to join the League and support the work it does. Thank you.